For years, a wild white stallion haunted the valleys of Montana, untamed, unstoppable, and feared by every cowboy who dared approach. They called it Ghost Wind, the horse no man could ride. Ranchers tried ropes, whispers, and patience. All failed. Then one morning, a quiet 8-year-old orphan named Lily wandered onto the ranch and did something impossible. She whispered a name no one else knew, and the stallion bowed its head and let her climb on. The town watched in disbelief as girl and horse became one. But this bond runs deeper than anyone imagined, tied to an old legend and a family secret buried long ago. What promise was made before Lily was born, and why does this wild horse answer only to her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun crept over the Bitterroot Mountains, painting the Montana Valley in shades of amber and gold. Ironwood Ranch sprawled across 200 acres of prime grazing land, its weathered barn standing sentinel against the endless sky. Thomas Hartwell stood on his porch, coffee steaming in his calloused hands, watching the mist rise from the creek that carved through his property like a silver thread through green fabric. At 68, Thomas carried the weight of this land in his bones. His face was a map of hard winters and harder summers, lines etched deep around eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow. The ranch had been in his family for 5 generations, each adding their sweat and dreams to the soil. His grandfather had built the main house with timber from these very mountains. His father had expanded the herd, making Hartwell cattle known throughout the state. And Thomas had held it all together through drought, recession, and the kind of personal loss that breaks lesser men. His daughter Sarah emerged from the house, veterinary bag already slung over her shoulder. At 42, she had her mother's steady hands and her father's stubborn determination. She'd left the ranch once, gone to veterinary school in Bozeman, built a practice in the city. But when her mother died and her father needed her, she'd come home without hesitation. That was 7 years ago, and she'd never regretted it. "Old Pete's already down at the south pasture," she said, joining him at the rail. "Says one of the heifers is showing signs of early labor." Thomas nodded. Pete Morrison had worked this ranch for 40 years, knew every inch of it better than Thomas knew his own reflection. At 75, Pete moved slower now, but his mind was sharp as the day he'd first ridden in looking for work, fresh from losing his own family's homestead to the bank. "I'll head down after breakfast," Thomas replied. "Miguel's with him?" "Already there. That boy's got ranching in his blood, even if he came to it late." Miguel Reyes had appeared 2 years ago, looking for seasonal work during college break. He'd stayed through one season, then another, eventually leaving school to work the ranch full-time. His family hadn't understood, wanted him to finish his degree, get a proper job in town. But Miguel had found something here he couldn't explain, a connection to the work and the land that felt more real than any classroom ever had. The ranch ran with the rhythm of seasons and the needs of livestock. Cattle needed tending, fences needed mending, hay needed cutting and baling. It was honest work that left you tired in the good way, muscles aching but spirits satisfied. The kind of life that had meaning built into every sunrise. But there was one element that had disrupted this pastoral routine, one mystery that had the entire valley talking for the past 5 years. The white stallion! He'd first appeared on a winter morning, emerging from the high country like something out of a dream. Pure white from mane to tail, standing 17 hands if he was an inch, with eyes dark as midnight and a presence that commanded attention. No brand, no markings, no indication of ownership or origin. Just a wild horse that had claimed the valley's ridges as his territory. Men had tried to catch him, of course. Good ropers with decades of experience. They'd set traps, used patience, offered grain and gentle words. The stallion had evaded them all with an almost supernatural awareness. He seemed to know their intentions before they acted, disappearing into the high country whenever pursuit grew too close. He'd earned his name honestly. Ghost Wind, they called him. The horse that couldn't be caught, wouldn't be tamed, answered to no man's call. Thomas had seen him dozens of times over the years, always at a distance, always watching. There was an intelligence in that animal that went beyond normal horse sense. Sometimes, standing on his porch at dusk, Thomas would spot the white shape on the eastern ridge and feel the strangest sensation, as if the horse was keeping vigil over the valley, protecting something precious that only he understood. The barn held its own history, thick wooden beams dark with age, and the sweet smell of hay and leather. Sarah spent most mornings there, checking on horses, organizing her veterinary supplies, preparing for the day's calls. This morning, as sunlight slanted through the high windows, she paused before an item that always caught her attention. The silver bridle hung on the far wall, positioned in a place of honor, though no one quite remembered who'd put it there or when. It was an antique, clearly, with hand-tooled leather gone soft with age, and silver fittings that had oxidized to a deep, mellow patina. But what made it remarkable were the engravings. Symbols wound along the silver pieces, patterns that seemed almost runic, and a name that time had worn smooth until only fragments remained. Thomas's grandfather had claimed it was there when he was a boy, his father before that. Family legend, passed down in whispers and half-remembered stories. Miguel found her staring at it. "You think about that bridle a lot," he observed, dropping a hay bale near the stalls. "Don't you wonder about it? Where it came from, who made it, why those symbols?" He shrugged. 28 years old and practical. "It's old, that's all we know for sure. Everything else is just stories. Stories matter, Miguel, especially in places like this, where the land remembers." He smiled at that, used to Sarah's occasional philosophical moments. "Pete's waiting for you at the south pasture. Hafer's doing fine, but he wants you to check her over." Sarah grabbed her bag, but her eyes lingered on the bridle one more moment. Something about it had always felt significant, as if it was waiting for something, or someone. The ranch operated on routines refined over decades. Morning chores, midday maintenance, evening feeding, night checks. Thomas managed the business side, tracking markets, negotiating sales, keeping the books balanced in an industry where margins were thin and weather could destroy a year's profit in a single storm. Sarah handled the medical needs, both for their own animals and for neighbors who'd come to trust her skill. Pete was the foreman in all but title, his experience worth more than any formal education. And Miguel had become the bridge between generations, young enough to understand new technologies, wise enough to respect old ways. It was a good life, Thomas reflected, even if it was harder than most people understood. The ranch wasn't just a business, it was a trust passed through generations, a responsibility to the land and the animals and the way of life itself. Some mornings he felt the weight of that trust, wondered if he was equal to it, if he'd preserved what his ancestors had built or merely delayed its inevitable decline. 3 days ago, everything had shifted. Social services had called. A child had been found walking along Route 93, 20 miles north of town. A girl, maybe 8 years old, dirty and exhausted but unharmed. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't say where she'd come from or where she was going. No missing persons reports matched her description. No identification, no family contacts, nothing but the clothes on her back and a small canvas bag with a few belongings. Standard procedure was emergency foster placement while they investigated. But beds were full, and the nearest available family was 3 counties away. Could the Hartwells take her just temporarily, just until they sorted things out? Thomas had lost his son David to war 8 years ago, a wound that never quite healed. Sarah had never married, never had children of her own. The idea of a child in the house again stirred emotions, both painful and hopeful. They'd said yes. Lily had arrived at sunset, a small figure with tangled dark hair and eyes that seemed too old for her young face. She clutched her canvas bag and said nothing, watching everything with an intensity that was almost unnerving. The social worker had apologized for the inconvenience, promised it would only be a few days, a week at most. That first night, Sarah had shown Lily to the guest room, the one that had been David's before he enlisted. It still held traces of him, ribbons from 4-H competitions, a picture of him with his first horse. Sarah had never had the heart to change it completely. Lily had set her bag down carefully, looked around the room with those ancient eyes, and finally spoke her first words. "Someone brave lived here." Sarah's throat had tightened. "My brother. He was very brave." "He still is," Lily had said, matter of fact, as if stating an obvious truth. Then she'd climbed into bed and fallen asleep within minutes, exhausted by whatever journey had brought her to their door. Thomas and Sarah had talked late into the night, trying to make sense of it. There was something about the child that felt significant, though neither could articulate why. She was just a lost girl who needed temporary shelter. Nothing more. Yet both had felt it, that subtle shift in the air, as if her arrival meant something they couldn't yet understand. The next morning, Lily had eaten breakfast in silence, observing the family dynamics with careful attention. She'd watched Thomas read the cattle futures in the newspaper, watched Sarah prepare her veterinary bag, watched Pete and Miguel come in for coffee and morning assignments. She absorbed everything, filed it away, but offered nothing of herself in return. "You can explore the ranch if you want," Thomas had told her. "Just stay within sight of the buildings. It's easy to get lost out here if you don't know the land." Lily had nodded, taken a piece of toast, and disappeared outside. Pete had watched her go, his weathered face thoughtful. "That child has something about her. Old blood, my grandmother would have called it. The kind that carries memory in the bones. She's just traumatized," Sarah had said, practical as always. "Whatever she's been through, she needs stability and patience, not mystical interpretations." But Pete had shaken his head. "Mark my words, that girl's here for a reason. Land brought her, same way it brought that white horse 5 years back. Some things are connected in ways we don't quite grasp." Thomas had dismissed it then as Pete's tendency towards superstition, the old ranch hand's habit of finding meaning in coincidence. But now, 3 days later, after what had happened this morning, Pete's words echoed with new weight. The valley itself seemed to hold its breath around Lily's presence. The ranchers had noticed her in town, the mysterious child staying at the Hartwell place. Questions circulated. Where had she come from? Did Thomas and Sarah plan to adopt her? What was her story? Small communities thrived on knowing everyone's business, and Lily was an unknown quantity, a puzzle piece that didn't fit any existing picture. Thomas had spent hours on the phone with social services, trying to get answers. But the system was overwhelmed, understaffed, and Lily's case was no one's priority. She was safe, she was placed. They'd investigate her origins when they had time. Be patient, keep her comfortable. They'd know more soon. Meanwhile, Lily had settled into ranch life with an ease that surprised them all. She helped with small chores without being asked, fed the chickens, collected eggs, swept the porch. She was quiet but not withdrawn, present but not intrusive. She watched everything with those knowing eyes, as if she was remembering rather than learning. And she was drawn to the barn, especially to that silver bridle on the wall. Sarah had found her standing before it multiple times, reaching up to touch the worn leather, tracing the strange symbols with small fingers. When asked about it, Lily would only say, "It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Sarah had asked. But Lily had just smiled, sad and knowing, and walked away without answering. The valley had its own rhythm, its own stories. Pete knew them all, had spent decades collecting tales from old-timers, piecing together a history that went beyond what any book recorded. On the second evening of Lily's stay, he'd gathered everyone around the fire pit outside, the Montana sky vast and star-filled above them. "This land's been special long before any of us came to it," Pete had begun, his voice carrying the cadence of a natural storyteller. "The tribes knew it first, called it a thin place where the boundary between worlds grows permeable. They'd come here for vision quests, for ceremonies, for healing. Said the land itself was alive in ways other places weren't." Miguel had poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "That's just legend, Pete. Every place has its stories. Stories carry truth, boy. Just because we can't measure something with instruments doesn't mean it ain't real." Pete had glanced at Lily, found her watching him with complete attention. The first white settlers, they felt it too. Horses they brought would act strange here, sensitive to things invisible. Crops grew better than they should, or failed despite perfect conditions. Weather patterns didn't follow normal rules. Some folks thrived here, felt nourished by the land itself. Others couldn't stand it, said it made them uncomfortable, like they were being watched by something they couldn't name. Thomas had heard these stories before, dismissed them as the kind of folklore every rural place accumulated over time. But something in Pete's telling that night felt different, more urgent, as if he was trying to convey information that mattered now in ways it hadn't before. In the 1890s, Pete had continued, there was a woman named Eleanor Hartwell, your great-great-grandmother, Thomas. She had a gift with horses, could gentle the wildest mustang with nothing but whispers and patience. But it went beyond skill. Folks said she could talk to them, that she understood their language in ways that weren't quite natural. Her family worried about her, thought she was touched in the head. They tried to marry her off, get her settled into a normal life. But Eleanor would have none of it. What happened to her? Sarah had asked, drawn in despite her skepticism. She vanished. One night in 1892, disappeared without a trace. Same night, a white horse she'd been working with also vanished. Some said she'd run off, eloped with some traveling man. Others said the family had her committed to an asylum. But the old-timers, the ones who knew, they said she'd become one with the horse, that she'd chosen a different kind of life than any human convention could contain. Lily had spoken then, her first contribution to the conversation. She didn't vanish. She transformed, became what she needed to be. The adults had fallen silent, uncertain how to respond. The girl's voice carried conviction that seemed far beyond her years, as if she spoke from knowledge rather than imagination. That's a nice thought, sweetie, Sarah had said gently. But it's just a story. All stories are true, Lily had replied. Just not always in the way people think. Pete had nodded slowly, recognition in his eyes. Wise words from a young soul, or maybe an old soul in a young body. That night, Thomas had lain awake long after the house fell silent, thinking about Eleanor, about the white stallion that haunted their valley now, about the strange child sleeping in his dead son's room. Separate elements that felt connected, though he couldn't articulate the links. The land remembers, Sarah had said about the bridle. Maybe she was right. Maybe the land held memories in ways that transcended normal understanding. And maybe those memories were choosing now to resurface, to speak through an 8-year-old girl with eyes too old for her face and words too knowing for her experience. Dawn arrived cold and clear on Lily's 4th morning at the ranch. Thomas woke to find the guest room empty. Lily's bed neatly made, but the girl herself nowhere in the house. His heart jumped with concern, images of the child lost in the vast Montana wilderness flooding his mind. He woke Sarah, and together they searched the immediate grounds, calling her name into the grey light of early morning. Miguel spotted her first, emerging from the bunkhouse with coffee in hand. "Boss, look, eastern pasture." There, walking barefoot across the dewy grass, was Lily. She moved with purpose, her thin nightgown soaked from the knees down, her dark hair loose and wild. But it wasn't the child that froze Thomas's breath. It was what waited at the fence line. Ghostwind stood less than 20 feet from the rails, closer than the stallion had ever allowed himself to come to human habitation. The white horse was magnificent in the dawn light, coat luminous, mane flowing like silk in the morning breeze. His dark eyes were fixed on the approaching child with an intensity that seemed almost human. "Sarah, get Pete," Thomas said quietly, not wanting to break whatever spell was unfolding. "Miguel, get your phone. Record this." Sarah ran. Miguel pulled out his cell phone, hands shaking slightly as he framed the shot. Thomas felt his own hands trembling as he gripped the porch rail, torn between the urge to protect the child and the recognition that something profound was occurring, something that shouldn't be interrupted. Lily reached the fence. She didn't hesitate, didn't show fear. She simply stood there, small and pale in her nightgown, and looked up at the massive stallion. Her lips moved, words too soft to hear from the house. But Ghostwind heard. His ears swiveled forward, his entire body going still with attention. Pete arrived, breathing hard, Sarah right behind him. Other ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse, drawn by the commotion. A dozen people now watched from various points around the ranch yard, all frozen, all afraid to move, lest they shatter the moment. Ghostwind lowered his head, stretched his neck toward Lily. Their faces were inches apart. The horse's nostrils flared, breathing in the child's scent. Lily raised one small hand, placed it on the white blaze that ran down the stallion's face. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the horse's eyes close, could see the visible relaxation that ran through the powerful body. "My God," Sarah whispered. "That's not possible," but it was happening. Lily climbed through the fence rails, slipping between them with the ease of a child accustomed to tight spaces. She stood now in the pasture, vulnerable, within striking range of hooves that could kill with a single blow. No one breathed. No one moved. The child placed both hands on Ghostwind's neck, leaned her forehead against his shoulder. Her mouth moved again, steady stream of words that carried on the morning air, but remained unintelligible. The stallion stood like a statue, accepting her touch, her presence, her communion. Then, impossible as everything else that had come before, Ghostwind lowered himself to his knees. The movement was deliberate, controlled, an act of submission that no wild horse should make, that this particular horse had never made for any human in 5 years of freedom. Lily didn't hesitate. She grasped the flowing mane, pulled herself up onto the broad back. No saddle, no bridle, no equipment of any kind. Just girl and horse, connected by something invisible but undeniable. Ghostwind rose smoothly to his feet, bearing his small rider with care. And then they moved. Not running, not frantic, but flowing across the pasture in a grace that transcended anything Thomas had ever witnessed. Horse and rider merged into a single entity, moving as one being, thinking as one mind. They circled the pasture, the white stallion's gait smooth as water. The small girl sitting easily, naturally, as if she'd been born on horseback. The watchers stood transfixed. Miguel kept his phone trained on the pair, documenting evidence that he knew no one would believe. Pete's weathered face showed no surprise, only confirmation of something he'd suspected. Sarah's scientific mind reeled, searching for rational explanations and finding none. And Thomas felt tears on his face, though he couldn't have said why, only that he was witnessing something sacred, something that transcended ordinary reality and touched the realm of myth. After what felt like hours, but was surely only minutes, Lily guided Ghostwind back to the fence. The stallion stopped exactly where he'd begun, lowered himself again to his knees. The child slid from his back, placed both hands on his face, and spoke directly into his ear. Then she kissed his nose, climbed back through the fence rails, and turned to face the assembled witnesses. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the morning air, the first full sentences she'd offered since arriving at the ranch. "His name is Stormwind. He's been waiting." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. Stormwind. He knew that name, had heard it somewhere in family stories, in fragments of letters, in whispered history. But before he could grasp the memory, Sarah was running toward Lily, scooping her up, checking her for injuries, overwhelmed by relief and confusion and a dozen other emotions. "You could have been killed," Sarah said, holding the child tight. "That horse is wild, dangerous. You can't just approach him like that." Lily looked at her with those ancient eyes, patient and knowing. "He would never hurt me. We belong to each other. We always have." The ranch erupted in conversation, everyone talking at once, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Miguel played back the video on his phone, confirming that it was real, documented, undeniable. The footage showed everything: the approach, the connection, the ride, the impossible bond between child and wild stallion. Pete approached Lily, knelt down to her eye level. "What did you say to him, child? What words did you speak?" "I told him I remembered. I told him I'd come back, just like I promised. I called him by his true name, the one only I know." She looked at the old man with something like recognition. "You understand, don't you? You know the old stories are true." "I do," Pete said softly. "I surely do." Thomas took Lily's hand, led her back toward the house. The morning's drama had left everyone shaken, and the child needed warmth, food, normal routine to ground her after such an extraordinary event. Sarah followed, still processing, still trying to reconcile what she'd seen with everything her scientific training told her should be possible. Inside, wrapped in a warm blanket with hot chocolate in her hands, Lily began to speak more freely than she had since arriving. She talked about Stormwind as if he was an old friend, described his personality, his preferences, his history. She knew things about the stallion that no one had ever documented, details about his habits and patterns that matched what the ranchers had observed over 5 years.
"How do you know all this?"
Sarah asked gently. "Have you seen him before? Did you live near here once?" Lily shook her head. "I've always known him, since before I was born, since before I was anything." It was then that Thomas noticed the small item that had fallen from Lily's pocket during the commotion. A leather journal, hand-stitched, worn soft with age, though it couldn't have been more than a few years old, given Lily's age. He picked it up, looked at the child for permission. "You can look," she said simply. Thomas opened the journal, Sarah reading over his shoulder. The pages were filled with drawings, rendered in careful detail despite being executed by a child's hand. Horses dominated the imagery. Hundreds of sketches of horses in various poses from different angles, capturing movement and personality with remarkable skill. But one horse appeared over and over, drawn with particular care and attention. A white stallion, unmistakably Ghostwind, or Stormwind as Lily called him. The drawings showed him running, grazing, rearing, standing on mountain ridges. They captured his essence with an intimacy that spoke of deep knowledge and long observation. The unsettling part was that Lily had been at the ranch for only 4 days, and before that she'd been found walking a highway 20 miles north. The social worker had confirmed she'd had the journal when they found her, which meant these drawings had been made before Lily had ever seen the white stallion in person. Unless she was telling the truth, unless she had known him always, unless memory worked in ways that transcended linear time and logical causality. Thomas turned to the last page of the journal. There, rendered in careful detail, was a woman, young, maybe late 20s, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to look directly out of the page. The woman stood beside the white stallion, one hand on his neck, her expression serene and knowing. Beneath the drawing, in a child's careful printing, were words that made Thomas's blood run cold. "This is me. This is us, before." The morning after the incident, the ranch felt different. Word had spread through the valley with the speed that news travels in small communities. Miguel's video had been shared, viewed hundreds of times already, and people were talking. The miracle girl, they called her. The child who could ride the wild horse that no man could tame. Lily visited Stormwind each morning now, a routine she fell into as naturally as breathing. She'd wake before dawn, dress quietly, and walk to the eastern pasture where the stallion waited. Thomas watched from the porch, coffee in hand, still trying to comprehend what his eyes witnessed. The white horse would approach the fence the moment Lily appeared, eager as any domesticated animal greeting a beloved owner. She'd climb through the rails, spend an hour with him, sometimes riding, sometimes just standing together in silent communion. Thomas had spent the previous night in the attic, digging through boxes of family documents he hadn't opened in decades. Birth certificates, property deeds, letters yellowed with age, photographs of stern-faced ancestors staring into primitive cameras. He was searching for something, following an instinct he couldn't quite name, drawn by that single word Lily had spoken: Stormwind. Sarah had begun her own investigation, approaching it with her characteristic practical thoroughness. She'd called the social worker, pressed for more information about where exactly Lily had been found. The answer troubled her. The child had been discovered walking along Route 93 near the old Hartwell homestead, the original family claim from the 1880s, now nothing but foundation stones and overgrown prairie grass, the place where Eleanor Hartwell had lived before she vanished. The coincidence felt too precise to be accidental. In town, Sarah stopped at the County Historical Society, a converted church building filled with archives and artifacts from the valley's settlement days. Mrs. Henderson, the volunteer curator, was delighted to help. Pulled out boxes of photographs and documents related to the Hartwell family history. "Your great-great-grandmother was quite a character," Mrs. Henderson said, laying out photographs carefully. "Eleanor Hartwell, beautiful woman by all accounts, but considered strange even by frontier standards. She had a way with horses that people found unsettling. There were rumors about her, whispers about witchcraft, though of course that was just superstition." Sarah studied the photographs. Eleanor Hartwell stared back from across more than a century, her face serious, her eyes intelligent and defiant. And there, in one photograph barely visible in the background, was a white horse. "Did she own a white stallion?" Sarah asked, heart racing. According to the records, yes. A wild mustang she'd gentled. She called him Stormwind, claimed he'd come to her in a dream before she ever saw him in person. Her family thought she was losing her mind. This was 1891, remember. Women who behaved oddly were often institutionalized, diagnosed with hysteria or nervous disorders. Eleanor's father tried to have her committed, but she disappeared before he could follow through. What happened to her? Mrs. Henderson shook her head. "No one knows. She vanished one night, and so did the white horse. Some say she ran away, others that she met with foul play. But there was never a body, never any evidence of what became of her. Just gone, like she'd been erased from the world." Sarah photographed every document, every image. She thanked Mrs. Henderson and drove back to the ranch with her mind spinning. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Eleanor and her white stallion named Stormwind. Lily and the white stallion she insisted was named Stormwind. The same family, the same land, separated by more than a century, but connected by something that transcended rational explanation. Back at the ranch, she found her father in his study, surrounded by old letters and faded documents. He looked up when she entered, his face showing the same troubled wonder she felt. "I found letters," Thomas said, gesturing to the papers spread across his desk. "From Eleanor to her sister. She wrote about the horse, described their connection in ways that sound exactly like what we're seeing with Lily. Listen to this." He picked up a letter, the paper so fragile it seemed it might crumble at a touch, and read aloud. "Dearest Margaret, you ask me to explain my bond with Stormwind, but I have no words that will satisfy your rational mind. He is not simply a horse, and I am not simply his rider. We are two halves of one soul, separated by the accident of different forms, but united in purpose and spirit. When I am with him, I remember things I should not know, see places I have never been, understand truths that have no words. Father calls it madness. I call it awakening." Sarah sank into a chair, the weight of evidence becoming impossible to dismiss. "Dad, what are we dealing with here? Reincarnation? Possession? Genetic memory? I'm a veterinarian, not a paranormal investigator. I need something concrete to hold on to." "Maybe we're asking the wrong questions," Thomas said slowly. "Maybe it doesn't matter what we call it or how we explain it. Maybe all that matters is that something extraordinary is happening, and we have a choice. We can deny it, send Lily away, pretend we didn't see what we saw. Or we can accept it and see where it leads." Before Sarah could respond, Miguel burst into the study, agitated. "Boss, we've got visitors." "Marcus Thornton just pulled up with two men in suits." Thomas's jaw tightened. Marcus Thornton owned the largest spread in the valley, 10,000 acres of prime land accumulated through 3 generations of aggressive acquisition and questionable business practices. He was a man who believed everything had a price and that his wealth entitled him to whatever he wanted. His visits to smaller ranches like Ironwood were never social calls. Outside, Thornton stood beside a black Range Rover, his considerable bulk dressed in expensive ranch wear that had never seen actual work. 55 years old, successful, entitled, and used to getting his way. The 2 men with him were clearly lawyers, carrying briefcases and wearing city suits inappropriate for ranch land. "Thomas," Thornton said, offering a handshake that felt more like a dominance display than a greeting. "Heard you've had some excitement around here. That wild stallion finally let someone get close." "News travels fast," Thomas replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I saw the video. Remarkable thing, that little girl riding him like he's some kind of circus horse. I've been trying to catch that animal for 3 years. Wanted him for my breeding program. A stallion like that with that coat, that size, he'd produce valuable offspring. He's not for sale, Marcus. He's wild, free. He doesn't belong to anyone." Thornton smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Everything belongs to someone, Thomas, and everything has a price. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 for that horse. That's generous, considering you can't legally claim ownership of a wild animal anyway." The answer is no. "Think about it. That's real money. Your ranch could use the capital, from what I hear. Beef prices are down, costs are up. 50,000 could keep you afloat through a hard winter." Thomas felt his temper rising, but kept it controlled. "Stormwind isn't mine to sell. Even if he were, I wouldn't. Some things aren't about money, Marcus." "Everything is about money," Thornton countered. "You just haven't found your price yet. But you will. Everyone does." He glanced toward where Lily stood watching from the porch, Stormwind visible on the ridge behind her. "That child shouldn't be playing with dangerous animals anyway. Social services might be interested to know you're allowing such risky behavior." The threat hung in the air, barely veiled. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Thornton and the house. "That sounds like intimidation, Mr. Thornton. Lily is perfectly safe here. And if you have concerns about child welfare, I suggest you take them through proper channels rather than making threats on private property." Thornton's smile widened. "No threats, Dr. Hartwell, just observations. I'll leave you to think about my offer, but the price won't stay on the table forever. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits." He climbed back into his Range Rover, the lawyers following. "I'll be in touch." As the vehicle disappeared down the drive, raising dust in its wake, Lily approached her temporary guardians. She'd heard everything, her young face troubled. "They tried to take him before," she said quietly. "That's why she had to hide him. That's why everything went wrong." "Who tried to take him?" Thomas asked. "Who's a she, Lily?" "Eleanor, me. I don't know how to explain the difference. They're the same, but separate, like looking through water at something beneath the surface. The Thorntons wanted the land back then, too. Eleanor's father owed them money. They said they'd forgive the debt if she'd sell Stormwind. She refused, and then she vanished. The pieces were assembling into a disturbing pattern." Thomas returned to his study, pulled up the property records he'd been researching. The original Hartwell homestead, where Eleanor had lived, was indeed now part of Thornton property. According to the historical records, it had been transferred after Eleanor's disappearance, payment for outstanding debts. But if Eleanor had vanished, how could the transfer be legal? Someone must have signed the papers, someone with authority to act on her behalf. Thomas dug deeper, found probate records from 1893 declaring Eleanor Hartwell deceased in absentia, her property reverting to her father, who'd immediately sold it to pay debts. To the Thornton family. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, old Pete joined Thomas on the porch. The old man carried something wrapped in a handkerchief, his expression serious. "Found this today while I was checking the old barn foundation. Thought you should see it." He unwrapped the object carefully. A copper locket, green with age but still intact. The chain was broken, but the locket itself opened with gentle pressure. Inside was a lock of white horsehair, carefully preserved, and a tiny portrait. A woman's face, painted with remarkable skill on ivory, gazed out at them. "Eleanor," Thomas breathed. The resemblance to the photographs Sarah had found was unmistakable. "There's an inscription," Pete pointed out. The inside of the locket bore engraved words, worn but legible. "Two hearts, one spirit, bound across all time." "Where exactly did you find this?" "A bury near the old barn, where we've been meaning to repair the fence line. It was buried about 6 inches down, like someone had hidden it there deliberately. Or dropped it and it got covered over the years." Thomas held the locket up to the fading light, watched it catch the sun's last rays. The white horsehair inside seemed to glow, impossibly preserved after more than a century underground. Pete, what do you really think is happening here? Not the rational explanation, but what your gut tells you. The old man was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. I think the land has a memory. I think some bonds go deeper than one lifetime. And I think that child is here because she needs to be, because something unfinished is finally getting a chance to complete itself. Whether you call it reincarnation or magic or just the universe's strange sense of justice, I couldn't say. But I know truth when I see it. And that little girl speaking to that white horse, that's truth as real as anything I've ever witnessed. That night, Thomas showed the locket to Lily. The child took it in her small hands, held it as if it was the most precious thing in the world, and began to cry. Not the crying of a frightened child, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone confronting profound loss and profound recognition simultaneously. I wore this, she said through her tears, the day they came for him. I was trying to protect it, to keep it safe, but everything happened so fast. I must have lost it in the struggle. What struggle, Lily? Sarah asked gently, sitting beside her.
What happened that day?
The Thorntons came with men. They said Father had sold Stormwind to clear his debts. But I knew he couldn't. Father loved me, even if he didn't understand me. I ran to the barn, tried to free Stormwind before they could take him. We fought. I remember hands grabbing me, Stormwind rearing up, hooves striking. Someone hit me. I fell. And then what? And then I wasn't in my body anymore. I was in the horse. I could see my body lying still in the barn, blood on my temple. I could see the men backing away, frightened. And I knew I had a choice. I could go toward the light, toward whatever comes after death. Or I could stay. Stay with Stormwind, stay with the land, stay until I could come back and finish what I'd started. You're saying Eleanor died that day, Thomas said slowly. And her spirit, her consciousness, went into the horse. We went into each other, merged, became something that was both of us and neither of us. And we've been here ever since, waiting. The horse ages differently when he's more than just a horse. Time works differently. And when the moment was right, when the land called, I could come back. Come back in a body that could live and speak and set things right. Sarah's scientific mind rebelled against the explanation. But her heart recognized truth when it heard it. So you're saying you're Eleanor, reincarnated, returned to deal with unfinished business. I'm saying I'm Lily, and I carry Eleanor's memories and spirit. I'm saying Stormwind is a horse, and he carries Eleanor's promise and purpose. I'm saying we're bound together by something that doesn't break just because a body dies or time passes. And I'm saying the Thorntons are still trying to take what isn't theirs, still trying to destroy what should be protected. Miguel had been listening from the doorway, his phone in hand. Boss, you need to see this. Thornton's been busy. He pulled up a news article, local paper from 3 days ago. He's filed paperwork to develop the old Hartwell homestead. Luxury resort, high-end cabins, golf course. Says it'll bring jobs and tourism to the valley. That land is historically significant, Sarah protested. There are protections for sites like that. Not if no one pushes back. Not if the county commissioners, who happen to golf with Thornton every Thursday, approve the permits without proper review. Miguel scrolled through more documents. He's been planning this for months, maybe years, waiting for the right time to move. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about a strange child and a wild horse anymore. It was about the valley's future, about land that held memory and meaning, about standing up to power and money when principle demanded it. He thought about his son David, who died fighting for principles he believed in. He thought about Eleanor, who'd given everything to protect what she loved. He thought about Lily, small and brave, and carrying burdens no 8-year-old should have to bear. And he made his decision. Then we fight, he said quietly. We stand our ground, we protect what matters, and we don't let money and power steamroll over truth and history. I don't know how we'll win, but I know we have to try. 2 weeks passed, autumn settling deeper into the valley, leaves turning gold and crimson across the mountain slopes. Lily and Stormwind's bond had become the valley's daily wonder and chief topic of conversation. She rode him every morning now, no longer confined to the pasture but ranging across Hartwell land and beyond, exploring the high country with a confidence that suggested intimate knowledge of terrain she'd never seen in her current lifetime. The town divided in its response. Some saw the miracle for what it was, felt the touch of something sacred, something that defied easy explanation but carried undeniable truth. Others, uncomfortable with what they couldn't understand, whispered about tricks, training, even drugs that might make a wild horse docile. But no one could watch Lily and Stormwind together and maintain their skepticism entirely. The connection was too pure, too profound, too obviously real. Thomas had thrown himself into research, becoming obsessed with understanding. The attic yielded more treasures, boxes of letters between Eleanor and her younger sister Margaret, who'd moved east after marrying. The correspondence painted a picture of a brilliant, sensitive woman trapped by the constraints of her era, finding freedom and truth in her relationship with a white stallion that seemed to understand her in ways no human could. One letter in particular haunted Thomas, written just weeks before Eleanor's disappearance. "I know Father plans to commit me to the asylum in Deer Lodge. I hear him discussing it with Dr. Morrison as if I'm not there, as if my understanding of reality is less valid than theirs, simply because it doesn't conform to their narrow definitions. But Margaret, I'm not mad. I see clearly, more clearly than I ever have. Stormwind has shown me that consciousness is not confined to human form, that love transcends physical boundaries, that the land itself holds memory and purpose. If they try to take him from me, if they try to cage me, I will choose freedom in whatever form it takes. I will not be broken by their fear of what they cannot understand." Sarah, meanwhile, had been building a different kind of case. She'd contacted environmental groups, historical preservation societies, tribal representatives. The old Hartwell homestead sat on land that multiple groups might have legitimate interest in protecting. If they could establish it as a heritage site, Thornton's development plans would face serious obstacles. But Thornton had resources and connections Sarah couldn't match. He'd hired expensive lawyers, courted county commissioners, made generous donations to local causes. He painted himself as a benefactor, bringing economic opportunity to a struggling rural valley, while casting opposition as backward-thinking obstructionists afraid of progress. At the ranch, life took on new rhythms. Lily spoke more freely now, sharing memories that were both hers and Eleanor's, describing the valley as it had been in the 1890s, with detail that matched historical records perfectly. She led Thomas to locations where Eleanor had buried treasures, keepsakes she'd wanted to preserve. They found Eleanor's riding gloves, butter-soft leather that had somehow survived burial in a sealed tin, a compass, its brass case engraved with the same symbols that marked the silver bridle, and most significantly, a letter sealed in wax, addressed in elegant script to whomever carries my heart forward. Thomas opened it with trembling hands. Sarah and Pete gathered around him in the ranch house kitchen. The paper inside was covered with Eleanor's precise handwriting, and as Thomas read aloud, the past reached across more than a century to speak directly to their present moment. "If you are reading this, then I have made my choice and carried it through. I could not bear to see Stormwind broken, caged, used as mere property by men who understand neither his nature nor his significance. And I could not bear to live in a world that demanded I deny the deepest truth of my being. So I have chosen to become one with him, to merge my consciousness with his in a way that transcends physical death. My body may rest in earth, but my spirit rides forever in the high country I love, watching over this valley, waiting for the day when I can return to finish what I started. And I will return. When the land faces its darkest hour, when greed threatens to destroy what should be sacred, I will come back. I will bring with me all those who love this valley, all those who remember what really matters. We will stand together, the living and the dead, the past and the present, united in defense of truth. This is my promise. This is my purpose. This is my gift and my burden. To whomever carries my heart forward, trust in what you see. Trust in what you feel. Trust that love is stronger than death and memory deeper than time. Eleanor Hartwell, September 1892. The kitchen fell silent. Outside, Stormwind's distant whinny carried on the evening breeze, as if acknowledging words that had waited more than a century to be read. The prophecy is clear, Pete said softly. This is that hour, the land's darkest moment, and she's come back, just like she promised. Thomas discovered the land deed 2 days later, buried in a metal box beneath the old barn foundation, where Pete had found the locket. The document was remarkably preserved, written on heavy paper that had resisted decay through protective wrapping and the dry Montana soil. It showed that Eleanor Hartwell had owned not just her family's homestead, but additional acreage purchased with her own money, inheritance from her mother's family. The property described in the deed was now part of Marcus Thornton's holdings, transferred under circumstances that the document's existence called into serious question. If Eleanor had owned the land outright, then the transfer after her disappearance might be invalid. And if the transfer was invalid, then Thornton's entire claim to that section might be legally vulnerable. Thomas took the deed to a lawyer in Missoula, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in historical property disputes. She examined the document carefully, ran searches through county records, and called Thomas back 2 days later with troubling news. The deed is legitimate, she said, but the transfer documents are suspicious. Eleanor was declared dead in absentia in 1893, and her property was immediately transferred to pay debts allegedly owed by her father to the Thornton family. But there's no paperwork showing how those debts were incurred, no promissory notes, no contracts. Just the Thorntons' word that money was owed. So it could have been theft, legalized through corrupt officials. Possibly, probably. But proving it more than a century later is complicated. We'd need to establish fraud, which means demonstrating that the Thorntons knew Eleanor wasn't actually dead, or that they coerced her father, or that the debts were fabricated. That's a high bar. What if we could prove Eleanor was murdered? That would make the transfer fruit of a crime. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Do you have evidence of that? Thomas thought about Lily's memories, about the struggle in the barn, about Eleanor's body lying still with blood on her temple. But memories from a past life, channeled through an 8-year-old girl, wouldn't hold up in any court. Not the kind that would satisfy a judge. Then we'll have to build our case on what we can document. Historical significance, environmental concerns, tribal interests. The deed helps, shows that the original transfer was questionable. But it's not a smoking gun. You'll need more. Thomas returned to the ranch, determined to find that more. But Thornton was escalating too. Fences on the border between properties were cut, gates left open, allowing Hartwell cattle to wander onto Thornton land, then impounded with fees demanded for their return. Anonymous calls to social services questioned Lily's welfare, triggering visits from concerned officials who had to be reassured that the child was thriving. A community meeting was called, ostensibly to discuss economic development, but really serving as a referendum on Thornton's resort plans. The high school gymnasium filled with Valley residents, families who'd lived here for generations, alongside newcomers who'd arrived seeking the rural peace the Valley offered. Thornton presented his vision with slick PowerPoint slides, architectural renderings of luxury cabins nestled into the mountainside, a championship golf course following the creek's natural contours, a spa and restaurant complex that would make the Valley a destination. This is progress, he declared, his voice carrying conviction and confidence. This is opportunity for our children, jobs for our families, investment in infrastructure that benefits everyone. Or we can cling to the past, to outdated ways and superstitious thinking, and watch this valley slowly die as young people leave for opportunities elsewhere. Then Thomas stood, feeling every eye in the room turn toward him. Public speaking had never been his strength, but some moments demanded courage, regardless of comfort. "Mr. Thornton speaks of progress," he began, voice steady despite his nervousness. "But he doesn't mention that the land he wants to develop holds sacred significance, that it's been the heart of this valley's identity for generations. He doesn't mention that his family may have acquired that land through fraud more than a century ago. And he doesn't mention that true progress doesn't require destroying what makes a place special. It requires honoring it." The room buzzed with reaction. Thornton's face flushed with anger, but Thomas continued, "We have a choice before us. We can sell our heritage for the promise of tourist dollars, or we can protect what makes this valley worth living in. Not every place needs to become a resort. Some places need to remain what they are, wild, authentic, connected to their history and their land." Lily stood then, small figure in a room full of adults, but her voice carried clearly. "This valley remembers. The land knows its own story, and some of us remember too, even if we weren't here to see it the first time. Eleanor Hartwell fought to protect this place. She gave everything for it. And if we forget that, if we let greed win now, then her sacrifice meant nothing." The crowd stirred. Some people nodded, moved by the child's words. Others looked uncomfortable, uncertain how to respond to such strange claims from someone so young. But no one could dismiss her entirely. There was something about Lily, about her connection to Stormwind, about the way she spoke of Eleanor, as if remembering rather than imagining, that carried weight. The meeting ended without resolution, the community still divided. But seeds had been planted, questions raised, doubts introduced into Thornton's carefully crafted narrative. At night, Lily's dreams grew more vivid, more detailed. She described them to Thomas and Sarah each morning, painting pictures of Eleanor's final days with such precision that Thomas could follow her path through the valley, could stand in locations where Eleanor had stood, seeing through her eyes across more than a century. "She knew they were coming," Lily said one morning, her young face troubled by old memories. Father had told her about the debt, about the arrangement he'd made with Thornton's grandfather. Sell the horse, clear the debt, everyone walks away satisfied. But she couldn't. Stormwind wasn't just property to her. He was family. He was purpose. He was the living embodiment of everything she believed about the connection between soul and nature. "So she hid him," Sarah prompted gently. "She tried. Took him into the high country, planned to keep him there until she could figure out a better solution. But they tracked them, brought men and dogs. There was a confrontation. Eleanor fought. And in the struggle, she fell, hit her head on the barn foundation. The men panicked, thought they'd killed her, covered it up, claimed she'd run away, forged documents to take the land. But she wasn't dead," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "Not completely. Her consciousness transferred to the horse, just like her letter described. We became one. And we've been here ever since, watching, waiting, protecting what we could. The valley has guardian spirits, you know. Not just us, but others. People who loved this place so much that dying couldn't separate them from it. They're all around us, especially now that the land is threatened. Can you feel them?" Thomas couldn't, but he believed Lily did. And increasingly, he believed she was right, that the valley held presences and memories that conventional understanding couldn't explain but experience confirmed. Miguel brought more troubling news. His research had uncovered Thornton's pattern of land acquisition across 3 generations. Parcels obtained under suspicious circumstances, original owners forced out through debt, legal pressure, or simple intimidation. The resort plan was just the latest in a long history of taking what the family wanted, regardless of who it hurt or what it destroyed. "He won't stop," Miguel said, showing Thomas the documents he'd compiled. "Even if we block the resort, he'll find another angle, another pressure point. Men like him don't accept defeat. They just regroup and come at you differently." Old Pete agreed. "Been dealing with Thorntons my whole life. They're persistent as a toothache and twice as painful. But they're also predictable. They use money and law when they can, intimidation when they can't, and they always Always underestimate people who fight for principle instead of profit. Sarah had organized a coalition, bringing together environmental groups, tribal representatives, historical preservation advocates, and concerned valley residents. They'd hired their own lawyers, filed challenges to Thornton's permits, requested environmental impact studies that would delay development. It was a holding action, buying time while they built their case, but it was something. Lily spent her days with Stormwind, riding further into the backcountry, showing Thomas and Sarah places that held significance. Springs where Eleanor had watered the horse, meadows where they'd spent summer afternoons, high ridges where the view stretched for miles and the wind carried whispers of the past. She was mapping the valley's sacred geography, documenting locations that would support their arguments for protection. "These aren't just pretty places," she explained, standing on a promontory overlooking 3 valleys. "They're anchor points, places where the land's energy concentrates, where the boundary between seen and unseen grows thin." Eleanor understood this. The native peoples before her understood it. It's knowledge that's been forgotten by most, but the land remembers even if people don't. Thomas documented everything, photographed every location, recorded Lily's explanations. It was strange testimony, mixing historical facts with spiritual interpretations, but it was building into something compelling, a narrative that gave weight and meaning to their fight. Storm clouds gathered both literally and figuratively. Weather patterns shifted, autumn storms rolling in with unusual intensity. And Thornton's legal pressure increased, court dates approaching, deadlines looming. The valley felt poised on a knife's edge, balanced between preservation and transformation, between honoring the past and surrendering to development. One evening, standing on the porch with the sunset painting the mountains in shades of fire, Thomas asked Lily the question that had been haunting him. "What happens when this is over? When the land is protected or lost? When the fight is finished? What happens to you?" Lily was quiet for a long moment, watching Stormwind graze in the distance. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe I get to be just Lily, just a girl with a family and a home. Or maybe I fade back into Stormwind, the mission complete. I don't control it, Dad. I'm just following what the land asks of me." It was the first time she'd called him Dad, and the word hit Thomas with unexpected force. This strange, knowing child had become his daughter in ways that transcended legal paperwork, had filled a space in his heart he'd thought would remain forever empty after David's death. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, medical lab return address, marked confidential. Sarah had ordered it weeks ago, when her scientific mind still insisted on physical evidence, on something concrete that could be tested and measured and proven. She'd taken a sample of Lily's hair during a routine brushing, had retrieved a strand of white horsehair from the locket Pete had found, and had sent both, along with her own DNA sample, to a private lab in Seattle that specialized in historical genetic analysis. She opened it alone in her veterinary office, hands trembling slightly. The results would either confirm Lily as a disturbed child with an overactive imagination, or they would confirm something that Sarah's education said was impossible. Either way, the truth would be documented. Undeniable. The first page was standard mitochondrial DNA analysis, tracing maternal lineage through genetic markers that passed from mother to daughter, unchanged across generations. Sarah scanned the technical language, the charts and graphs and genetic sequences, until she reached the conclusion that made her breath catch. Subject 1. Lily and historical sample Eleanor Hartwell show direct maternal line connection with 99.7% confidence. Subjects share identical mitochondrial DNA markers, indicating direct descent through unbroken female lineage. Sarah read it 3 times, certain she'd misunderstood. But the science was clear, unambiguous. Lily was genetically descended from Eleanor Hartwell through a direct maternal line. But Eleanor had died childless, vanished at 28, no record of offspring, no indication she'd ever been pregnant beyond that one miscarriage mentioned in her letters. The second page made it worse. The lab had also analyzed the white horsehair from the locket against samples Sarah had provided from Stormwind. Standard procedure would show them as unrelated, different animals separated by more than a century. Instead, the analysis showed something the lab technician had flagged with multiple question marks and a note requesting verification of sample integrity. The genetic material from both samples shows markers consistent with the same individual, which is impossible given the age difference of the samples. Contamination is possible, but unlikely given handling protocols. Recommend retesting with fresh samples. Sarah sat in her office for an hour, trying to reconcile what the DNA said with what reality should allow. Lily was Eleanor's direct descendant, but Eleanor had no children. Stormwind and the horse from Eleanor's time were genetically identical, but horses didn't live 130 years. Every rational explanation crumbled under the weight of evidence that shouldn't exist, but undeniably did. She drove to the ranch in a daze, found her father in the barn repairing tack. When she showed him the results, Thomas read them slowly, his weathered face showing no surprise, only confirmation of what he'd already come to believe. "So it's true," he said simply. "All of it. However impossible, however much it violates what we think we know about reality, it's true. Dad, this doesn't make sense. The DNA says Lily is Eleanor's direct descendant, but Eleanor had no children. She died at 28. The math doesn't work, unless Eleanor didn't die. Unless she became something else, something that could carry forward through time in ways we don't understand. And unless somewhere along the way, some part of her essence created offspring, continued the bloodline even while her consciousness lived in other forms. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist on rational explanations. But she'd seen Lily with Stormwind. She'd read Eleanor's letters. She'd felt the undeniable presence of something extraordinary unfolding. The DNA was just confirmation of what her heart already knew. They found Lily in the pasture, sitting in the grass while Stormwind grazed nearby. When they approached with the lab results, she looked up with those knowing eyes and smiled sadly. "You tested us," she said. "I felt you take the hair, knew what you were planning. Did the science help? Did it make believing easier?" "Lily," Sarah said, kneeling beside her. "The DNA says you're Eleanor's direct descendant, but that's impossible unless Eleanor had a child. Did she? Is there family history we don't know about?" The girl shook her head. "Eleanor's body died without children, but her essence, her soul, her consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that continued. And when the time was right, when the land needed a voice and a champion, that essence took form again. Took my form. I'm not descended from Eleanor. I'm Eleanor returned. The DNA just proves what spirit already knows. We're the same person, the same soul, separated by time, but connected by purpose." Thomas placed his hand over his heart, feeling its steady beat, thinking about his son David, who died half a world away. "Before you came here, you said something to Sarah. You said David was proud of me, that he sent you here to help. How could you know about David?" "Because he's here too," Lily said simply. "Not in a body, not the way I am, but his presence, his love for you and this land. It's woven into the valley just like Eleanor's is. The dead don't really leave the places they loved. They watch, they wait, they help when they can. David told me about his secret spot, the place behind the barn where he'd go to think when he was troubled. He showed me in a dream, wanted me to tell you so you'd know I was telling the truth about everything else." Sarah felt tears on her face. "This isn't how science works. This isn't how reality works. Maybe reality is bigger than science understands," Thomas said softly. "Maybe there are truths that can't be measured in labs, but are no less real for it." As if in response to his words, Stormwind lifted his head, looking toward the eastern ridge. His nostrils flared, a deep sound rumbling from his chest. Not quite a whinny, but something older, more primal. And then, impossible as everything else that had happened, other horses appeared on the ridge. White horses, 7 of them, emerging from the pine forest like morning mist taking shape. They moved with an otherworldly grace, their coats luminous in the afternoon sun, their presence commanding attention from everyone on the ranch. Miguel emerged from the bunkhouse, Pete from the equipment shed, ranch hands from various tasks, all drawn by the sight of these magnificent animals that had appeared from nowhere. "The herd returns," Pete breathed, awe evident in his voice. "Legend says they come when the Guardian calls, when the land needs all its defenders. I never thought I'd live to see it." Sarah pulled out her phone, tried to photograph them, but the images wouldn't focus properly. The white shapes appeared on the screen as blurs of light, present but not quite solid, there and not there simultaneously. It was as if the horses existed in a space between physical reality and something else, visible to the eye, but beyond the camera's ability to capture. "What are they?" Miguel asked, his voice hushed with wonder. "Memories made manifest," Lily said, standing now, Stormwind moving to her side. "Every horse Eleanor ever knew, every animal she loved and worked with, every spirit that chose to stay when the body died. They're guardians, protectors, the land's response to threat. They've been here all along, invisible unless you knew how to see them. But now that the valley's need is greatest, they're showing themselves to everyone." On the ridge, the 7 white horses stood watching, and as Thomas looked at them, he could have sworn he saw other shapes moving among them. Human figures, translucent but recognizable. His grandfather, his great-grandfather, generations of Hartwells who'd worked this land and loved it. And there, standing beside one of the white horses, a young man in military fatigues, face peaceful and whole, despite the violence that had ended his physical life. "David," Thomas whispered, and the figure seemed to acknowledge him. A hand raised in greeting or blessing or farewell. Thornton's men, who'd been conducting a survey on the property boundary, saw it too. Thomas watched them back away, faces pale, equipment forgotten. Fear crossed their features, the primal recognition that they were witnessing something beyond normal experience, something that suggested their intentions weren't welcome here. Word spread through the valley with the speed of wildfire. The ghost horses had appeared. The dead were walking. The land itself was defending its sacred places. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria, trick of light, shared delusion. But too many people had seen it, experienced it, felt the undeniable presence of something extraordinary. That night, valley elders began arriving at the ranch. Mrs. Chen, who'd shared stories from her grandmother. The Rodriguez family, whose roots in the valley went back 4 generations. The Johnsons, the Petersons, the Blackfeet tribal representatives, the environmental activists, the historical society members. Each brought something, an artifact, a photograph, a story, a memory. Each carried a piece of the valley's larger truth, fragments that were assembling into an undeniable whole. The valley was awakening. Its history was surfacing. Its memory was speaking, and at the center of it all stood an 8-year-old girl and a white stallion, bound together by something stronger than death, calling forth all those who'd ever loved this land to stand in its defense. 3 days remained before Thornton's court hearing, where a judge would rule on the permits for his resort development. Patricia Chen, their lawyer, was pessimistic despite the evidence they'd gathered. The DNA results, while extraordinary, weren't legally relevant to property rights. Eleanor's deed proved historical ownership, but not that the transfer had been fraudulent. The environmental concerns and tribal interests would delay development, but probably not stop it permanently. "You'd need something definitive," Patricia told Thomas over the phone. "Proof of fraud, proof of crime, proof that fundamentally invalidates Thornton's claim. Without that, the best we can hope for is temporary delays and partial protections." The community had mobilized, organizing resistance with the fervor of people who finally understood what was at stake. Sarah coordinated with environmental groups, presenting data on sensitive ecosystems, endangered species, watershed concerns. Miguel contacted tribal elders, documenting sacred sites and traditional use areas. Old Pete worked with the Historical Society, compiling oral histories and archival evidence of the valley's cultural significance. But Lily knew it wasn't enough. Legal arguments and bureaucratic processes moved too slowly, relied on systems that often valued property rights over sacred truths. The land needed to speak for itself, needed to demonstrate its significance in ways that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. "We need to do the ceremony," she told Thomas on the evening 3 days before the hearing. "The one Eleanor wrote about, the one that connects all 7 anchor points and lets the valley show its true nature." Thomas had discovered the valley map among Eleanor's papers, a hand-drawn chart showing the 7 locations Lily had described, each marked with a star, each corresponding to a family's land, each representing a point where the valley's energy concentrated. The ranch sat at the center, the heart from which all else radiated. "What exactly happens during this ceremony?" Sarah asked, her scientific caution warring with everything she'd witnessed. "The families gather at each anchor point simultaneously. They speak words that acknowledge their connection to the land, their responsibility as stewards rather than owners. And when all 7 points are activated, when the circuit is complete, the valley responds. It shows itself. Its true nature becomes visible, undeniable, even to those who've spent their whole lives refusing to see. And that will stop Thornton. It will show everyone what's really at stake. Not just property or profit, but something sacred that can't be measured in money. Some people will see and still not care. But enough will understand. Enough will refuse to allow destruction of something holy." Old Pete confirmed the ceremony's details from his grandfather's accounts. "It was done once before in 1911, when mining companies wanted to strip the mountainsides. Families gathered, spoke the old words, and the land sang. Everyone in the valley felt it, this presence, this consciousness that was bigger than any individual. The mining permits were withdrawn. The companies left, and no one spoke much about why, but everyone knew. But we control one of the anchor points," Thomas said, studying the map. "And Thornton owns another, the stolen land, where Eleanor's homestead stood. How do we activate a point on his property when he's trying to destroy everything we're fighting for?" "We trespass," Miguel said simply. "We do what's right, regardless of what's legal. Some things matter more than property law." The next day, Lily began visiting the families, asking each to participate in the ceremony. She approached it with a child's directness, but spoke with Eleanor's wisdom, describing what was needed and why it mattered. Some agreed immediately, feeling the truth in her words. Others were skeptical, worried about legal consequences or social judgment. But she persisted, patient and determined. Mrs. Chen agreed to gather her family at the Eastern Ridge, the first anchor point where sunrise would begin the ceremony. The Rodriguez family took the Southern Creek, Miguel's extended relations, understanding instinctively what was being asked of them. The Western Meadow belonged to Pete's family, and the old man rallied his scattered children and grandchildren, calling them home for something that transcended normal obligations. The Northern Forest, technically federal land but historically used by the Blackfeet, was claimed by tribal representatives who understood sacred responsibility. They would bring their own ceremonies, their own prayers, their own acknowledgement of what the valley meant. The River Bend, neutral territory where multiple claims overlapped, became the gathering point for those without direct land ties, but with commitment to the valley's protection. Environmental activists, historical society members, concerned citizens who'd watched the conflict unfold and chosen a side, which left 2 points. The ranch at the center, where Thomas, Sarah, and Pete would stand with Lily and Stormwind. And the 7th point, Eleanor's old homestead on Thornton's property, where someone would have to stand in open defiance of law and power and money. "I'll do it," Miguel volunteered. "I'm young, expendable. If anyone gets arrested, better me than folks with families and businesses to protect." "You're not expendable," Sarah said firmly. "And you won't go alone. We'll all go if necessary," but Lily shook her head. "It has to be someone with connection to Eleanor, someone the land recognizes, someone willing to stand where she fell and speak for her when she can't speak for herself." Thomas understood then, felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders. "It's my responsibility. Eleanor was my great-great-grandmother. That land should never have been taken from our family. I'll stand on it, speak for her, and face whatever consequences come. The sheriff learned of their plans, called Thomas to warn him. I sympathize with what you're trying to do, Tom, but if Thornton files a complaint, I'll have to enforce the law. Trespassing on his property, especially with advanced knowledge, that's not something I can ignore. I understand, Bill. Do what you have to do. We'll do what we have to do. Some things are bigger than law. The injunction takes effect at sunrise on the day of the hearing. You'd have minutes maybe before I'd be legally required to remove you. Then we'll make those minutes count. Word spread through the valley of what was planned. Some called it foolish, pointless theatrics that would accomplish nothing but legal trouble. Others understood it as necessary, the moment when principle had to be demonstrated regardless of cost. The valley was choosing sides, not through argument or persuasion, but through the deep recognition of what mattered most. Thornton learned of it too, of course. He called Thomas, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You're planning to trespass on my property. You're organizing some kind of mass demonstration. I'm warning you, I will prosecute to the fullest extent. I will sue you personally, take your ranch, destroy you financially. Do what you think you must, Marcus. We'll do the same. You're risking everything for superstition and sentiment. That land is mine, legally purchased and properly owned. What you're planning won't change that, maybe not legally. But there are other kinds of truth, Marcus. Other kinds of ownership. Eleanor died protecting that land. Her blood is in that soil. And sometimes blood claims are stronger than paper ones. The night before the ceremony, the ranch felt electric with anticipation. Families were gathering in town, preparing to move to their assigned locations before dawn. Pete had printed copies of the words to be spoken, ancient phrases in multiple languages that acknowledged connection, responsibility, and reverence. Lily had helped translate them, working from Eleanor's notes, from tribal sources, from memory that transcended her 8 years. Thomas sat with his daughter Sarah on the porch, watching stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Stormwind was visible on the ridge, 7 white ghost horses flanking him, guardians waiting for the appointed moment. "Are you scared?" Sarah asked. "Terrified. Of failure, of legal consequences, of making things worse instead of better. But also certain. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're standing for something true. That matters, regardless of outcome. Mom would be proud of you, of all of us. She'd probably tell us we're crazy and then stand right beside us anyway." That was her way. Lily joined them, small figure in an overlarge coat, her dark hair loose in the night breeze. She carried the copper locket, Eleanor's locket, wearing it now as if it had always been hers. Because in a sense it had. "I dreamed about tomorrow," she said, settling between them. Saw how it could go. The land responding, the valley showing itself, people understanding finally what we've been trying to protect. But I also saw resistance, fear, those who refuse to see no matter what's shown. Tomorrow won't solve everything. It's just one step in a longer journey. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked. "I've been ready for more than a century. Eleanor died not knowing if any of it mattered, if her sacrifice meant anything. Now I get to finish what she started. I get to stand where she fell and speak the words she never got to say. However tomorrow goes, that completion matters. That closure matters." Inside the house, Miguel was reviewing logistics with ranch hands, making sure everyone knew their roles, their timing, their backup plans. He'd become Thomas's right hand through this crisis, the young man's commitment never wavering, despite risks to his own future. Old Pete sat by the fire, speaking quietly with tribal elders who'd arrived to coordinate their participation. They shared stories, finding common ground across different traditions, recognizing that sacred land transcended cultural boundaries. What mattered to the Blackfeet mattered to the settlers' descendants, and both groups were finding their voices joined in common cause. Sarah had contacted media, inviting journalists to witness what would happen. If the valley was going to speak, if something extraordinary was going to occur, she wanted documentation beyond Miguel's phone camera. She wanted proof that would outlast skepticism, evidence that future generations could reference when they needed reminding of what their ancestors had protected. As midnight approached, Lily made her final visit to Stormwind. Thomas watched from the porch as girl and horse stood together in the pasture, foreheads touching, sharing communion that needed no words. Whatever happened tomorrow, whatever they faced together, they were ready. The land was ready. The valley's memory was prepared to speak. And all those who'd ever loved this place, living and dead, were gathering for one last stand against those who would destroy what should remain sacred. Dawn arrived cold and crystalline. The sky, that particular shade of blue that comes only on autumn mornings in Montana. Stars were still visible in the west as the eastern horizon began to glow. Across the valley, 7 groups of people moved to their appointed locations, guided by coordinates, by memory, by something deeper than navigation. Thomas stood at the ranch center with Sarah, Pete, and a dozen ranch hands. They'd gathered in a circle around the spot Lily had identified, the exact heart of the valley's geometry. The place where all 7 anchor points converged energetically, if not physically. Stormwind waited with Lily mounted on his bare back, the white stallion's coat luminous in the pre-dawn light. The 7 ghost horses surrounded them, barely visible but undeniably present. Sheriff Bill Morrison's vehicles were approaching, headlights cutting through the grey light. They'd been dispatched to stop the trespass on Thornton's property, to enforce the injunction that would take effect at sunrise. The timing was impossibly tight. They had minutes, perhaps less. Old Pete raised his voice, beginning the ceremony with words in a language older than English, older than any European tongue. The Blackfeet elders on the river bend heard him across the distance, their own voices joining in response. Sound carried strangely in the still morning air seemed to echo and amplify beyond natural acoustics. Lily touched her heels to Stormwind and they moved. Not running, not rushing, but flowing with purpose toward the first anchor point. The eastern ridge, where Mrs. Chen and her family stood. 3 generations gathered on land their ancestors had homesteaded in 1883. As Lily and Stormwind approached, Mrs. Chen began speaking, her voice steady and clear. We acknowledge this land, acknowledge our place as caretakers, not owners, acknowledge the sacred trust passed through generations. We stand here not by right of purchase, but by right of love, by right of memory, by right of those who came before and those who will come after. The earth responded. Thomas felt it from his position at the ranch center, a vibration that wasn't quite physical, more like a frequency just below normal hearing. The grass seemed to shimmer, the air to thicken with presence, and where Lily and Stormwind stood with the Chen family, light gathered, soft and golden, as if sunrise had concentrated itself in that exact location. They moved to the second point, the southern creek where the Rodriguez family waited, Miguel's cousins and aunts and uncles standing in the grass beside water that had flowed for millennia. Miguel's grandmother spoke the words in Spanish, beautiful and reverent, acknowledging connection that transcended nationality or language. The water seemed to respond, its sound deepening, becoming almost musical. Third point. Pete's family at the western meadow gathered around the old man who'd spent 75 years walking this land, who knew every rock and tree and animal trail. His voice carried weight earned through decades of faithful stewardship. And where he stood, where his family stood, the meadow grasses rippled in waves, though there was no wind, patterns forming and reforming like breathing. Fourth point, the northern forest, where tribal representatives had built a small fire, performing their own ceremonies that predated any European presence. Their prayers wove with the others, different traditions finding harmony in common purpose. The trees seemed to lean in, ancient pines and firs bearing witness, their presence adding to the growing power. Fifth point, the river bend where activists and historians and concerned citizens had gathered, people without land claims but with commitment deeper than property. They spoke together, voices blending, affirming that care for place wasn't measured in deeds or dollars but in attention, in respect, in willingness to protect what should remain protected. The sixth point approached, Eleanor's old homestead on Thornton's property, where Thomas waited alone. He'd climbed the fence before dawn, walked across land his family should have inherited, and stood on foundation stones where his great-great-grandmother had built her life and lost it. Sheriff Morrison's vehicles were close now, lights flashing, but protocol required warning before action. Thomas had minutes at most. Lily and Stormwind cleared the fence in a single graceful leap, landing beside Thomas with the 7 ghost horses flowing behind them like morning mist. Marcus Thornton was there too, had driven out in his Range Rover with his lawyers, determined to document the trespass, to make his case for prosecution ironclad. He stood 50 feet away, phone raised, recording everything. Thomas began speaking, voice steady despite his racing heart. I stand where my great-great-grandmother fell, where her blood soaked into this soil, where she made a choice between submission and sacrifice. I speak for her. I speak for all those who loved this land more than they loved their own comfort or safety. I acknowledge the theft, acknowledge the fraud, acknowledge that this ground holds memory of violence and injustice. And I reclaim it, not legally but truthfully, in the name of Eleanor Hartwell and all she represented. The earth shook, actually, physically trembled beneath their feet. Thornton stumbled, his phone dropping to the grass. His lawyers backed away, faces pale. Even Sheriff Morrison stopped his approach, uncertain whether to proceed when the ground itself seemed to be rejecting their purpose. Lily dismounted, placed her small hands on the foundation stones, and the 7th point activated, light and power surging up from the earth itself, connecting with the other 6 points in a circuit of energy that became visible to everyone present. Lines of golden light traced across the valley, connecting the 7 locations in a perfect geometric pattern with the ranch at its heart. The valley sang. There was no other word for it. Sound rose from the earth, from the water, from the trees and grass and stone. Not music exactly, but vibration that resonated in bone and blood, that every person in the valley felt simultaneously, regardless of where they stood. It was the land's voice, its consciousness made manifest, its presence undeniable even to the most skeptical. Springs that had been dry for years suddenly bubbled to life. The creek's flow strengthened, its water running clear and cold and pure. Birds rose in massive flocks, their flight patterns forming shapes that seemed almost intentional, almost designed. The grass rippled in coordinated waves that spelled out patterns older than language, and through it all, the 7 white ghost horses circled, visible now to everyone, their presence confirming that the boundary between seen and unseen had grown permeable. Thornton fell to his knees, overwhelmed. In the golden light that suffused the entire valley, he saw something others saw too. Figures, translucent but recognizable. The valley's dead, all those who'd lived and loved this place, all those who'd chosen to remain even after their bodies failed. They stood at the anchor points, they walked the ridges, they gathered around the living, witnessing, blessing, adding their presence to the ceremony. And there, standing beside Stormwind, as real as anyone living, was Eleanor Hartwell herself. Young, beautiful, her face showing the same knowing peace that Lily's carried. She placed her hand on the white stallion's neck, and in that moment everyone understood. The woman and the horse, the past and the present, the memory and the flesh, all one, all connected, all part of something larger than any individual life. Sheriff Morrison lowered his radio, made no move to enforce the injunction. How could he? How could anyone interrupt what was happening, what the entire valley was experiencing? This wasn't a crime being committed. It was a revelation unfolding, a truth being demonstrated that transcended human law. The sun fully crested the eastern ridge, and the golden light intensified until it seemed the whole valley glowed from within. Every person present felt it. A sensation, like being embraced, like being recognized, like being reminded of something fundamental they'd forgotten. The land knew them, the land remembered them, and the land was asking them to remember in return, to recognize their place, not as masters, but as participants in something ancient and ongoing. Lily remounted Stormwind, and they returned to the ranch center, completing the circuit. The 7 anchor points blazed with light, their connection visible as golden threads weaving through the valley's geography. Thomas followed, walking back across Thornton's land, with Eleanor's ghost walking beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. At the ranch center, Lily dismounted for the last time. She knelt in the grass, pressed her hands into the earth, and spoke the final words. "The valley has spoken. The land has shown itself. Let all who have eyes to see, see. Let all who have hearts to feel, feel. This place is sacred. This ground is holy, and those who would destroy it must answer not to law or profit, but to truth itself." The earth beneath her hands grew warm, then hot. She pulled back, and where her hands had been, something pushed up through the soil. A stone, smooth and white, roughly the size of a fist. It pulsed with light, with warmth, with a rhythm that matched the human heartbeat. The Heartstone, Pete called it later. The valley's physical anchor, its heart made manifest. Lily held it aloft, and the light from the 7 anchor points converged on it, passing through it, amplifying through it, until the entire valley was bathed in radiance that cameras captured but couldn't explain, that scientists would analyze but never fully understand. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the ceremony concluded. The light faded, though it didn't disappear entirely. The ghost horses remained visible, though less solid than they'd been. The presence of the dead receded but didn't vanish, and the valley settled back into itself, changed but still recognizably the same place it had always been. Marcus Thornton approached Thomas slowly, a man transformed by what he'd witnessed. His face showed confusion, wonder, and something like shame. "I saw her," he said quietly. "Eleanor. She looked at me and I understood. What my family took, what we justified, what we built our wealth on. It was theft. It was wrong. And I've been perpetuating it, adding my own greed to generations of taking. You could choose differently," Thomas said. "You could help protect instead of destroy." Thornton looked at the foundation stones where he stood, at the land his family had acquired through fraud and violence. "The resort plans, I'm withdrawing them. The permits, the development, all of it. And this land, the homestead property, I'm deeding it back to your family. It should never have been taken. I can't undo 130 years of injustice, but I can stop adding to it." Sheriff Morrison witnessed the statement. Journalists recorded it. Lawyers scrambled to understand the legal implications. But the essential truth was clear. Thornton had been changed by what he'd experienced, had felt the land's consciousness, and found himself unable to continue plans that would violate it. The ceremony had worked. Not through law or argument or evidence, but through direct experience of truth that couldn't be denied. The valley had spoken, and even the most resistant heart had been forced to listen. 3 months passed, winter settling over the valley with the peaceful certainty of seasons that had cycled for millennia. The legal matters resolved themselves more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. Thornton made good on his promise, deeding the homestead property back to the Hartwell family and establishing a conservation easement on his remaining land that would prevent development in perpetuity. The court hearing was cancelled, the permits withdrawn, the resort plans abandoned. Lily's adoption by Thomas and Sarah was finalized on a December morning, her status changing from temporary placement to permanent family. The social workers had documented her remarkable progress, her transformation from silent, traumatized child to vibrant, healthy girl. Whatever her origins, whatever mysteries remained unsolved, she belonged with the Hartwells. Everyone could see that. She still rode Stormwind daily, their bond as strong as ever, but the urgency had passed. They moved together now, with the ease of old friends enjoying each other's company, rather than warriors preparing for battle. The white stallion seemed content, no longer haunting the ridges with restless energy, but grazing peacefully, watching over the valley with benevolent attention. The ghost horses appeared less frequently now, visible mainly at dawn or dusk, reminders rather than active presences. But everyone in the valley knew they remained, watching, protecting, ready to manifest again if need arose. The ranch had become a gathering place, families visiting to hear old Pete's stories, children learning valley history from someone who'd lived it and from a girl who remembered it across lifetimes. Annual ceremonies were planned, honoring the land, acknowledging the sacred trust of stewardship. The valley had found its voice, and its people had learned to listen. Sarah's veterinary practice flourished, her documentation of the ceremony making her something of a minor celebrity in circles that appreciated such things. She'd stopped trying to explain scientifically what had happened, accepting that some truths existed beyond measurement, validated by experience rather than instruments. Miguel had become ranch foreman officially, his commitment rewarded with responsibility and trust. His family, initially disappointed by his choice to abandon formal education, now understood the value of what he'd found. Some lessons weren't taught in classrooms. Marcus Thornton visited monthly, a changed man seeking redemption through action rather than words. He funded valley preservation efforts, supported historical documentation, used his wealth now to protect rather than exploit. The transformation wasn't complete, probably never would be, but the direction had changed. That mattered. One evening in late December, as the first serious snow fell, Thomas sat on his porch with Lily beside him and Stormwind grazing below. Sarah joined them, bringing hot chocolate, settling into the peaceful silence that came naturally to those who'd shared extraordinary experience. "Do you still feel Eleanor?" Thomas asked Lily gently. "Or are you just Lily now?" The girl considered, watching snowflakes swirl in the porch light. "I'm both. I'm always both. Eleanor's memories are part of me, but they don't overwhelm me anymore. I remember her life, her love, her sacrifice. But I'm also just me, an 8-year-old girl with a family and a home and a future that's all my own." "Will Stormwind stay?" Sarah asked. "As long as I need him. As long as the valley needs him. When I'm grown, when the land feels truly safe, he might fade back into whatever realm he came from. Or maybe he'll just be a horse, living out a normal lifespan, his magic no longer necessary. I don't control it. The land decides." Thomas pulled her close, grateful beyond words for the strange gift that had been placed in his care. A child who'd filled the void left by his son's death, who'd brought purpose back to his life, who'd reminded him that some things mattered more than practical concerns or rational explanations. "Your mother would have loved you," he said. "Would have understood you in ways I'm still learning to." "She does love me," Lily said simply. "She's here too, you know. Not visible, not the way Eleanor was during the ceremony, but present, watching, proud of both of you." They sat in comfortable silence as snow accumulated, transforming the valley into a landscape of white and shadow. The hearthstone rested on the mantel inside, warm to the touch, a physical reminder of the day the land had spoken. Valley families had asked to see it, to hold it, to feel its pulse. Thomas had allowed it, understanding that it belonged to everyone, that sacred things shouldn't be hoarded. A new photograph hung beside the old ones in the ranch house hallway. Lily and Stormwind at sunset, surrounded by valley families at the first unity gathering they'd established. The image captured something the camera shouldn't have been able to record. Translucent figures visible among the living, past and present, merged in celebration of place and purpose. The valley settled into winter, held safe by memory, by promise, by love. The white horse grazed peacefully. The girl grew into her life, and the land remembered all those who'd chosen to honor rather than exploit it. Some things weren't meant to be tamed or possessed. They were meant to be protected, celebrated, passed on to future generations with the sacred trust that came from understanding what really mattered. The land remembered, the people remembered, and in remembering, they found themselves part of something larger than any individual life, connected to those who'd come before and those who would come after, bound together by place and purpose in the wild. White horse that would never be broken because some spirits were meant to remain forever free.